Hi, I'm Elisa, and this is the InsecureEpicure. Today, we are going to be making Jim Leahy's no-knead bread. The reason I'm doing this is because it's a great book, but I think people are still intimidated. So I want to show you how easy it is to make bread, really good, crusty bread. The only thing you really need is time. It's a 2-day process. So usually I start in the afternoon when the kids are coming home from school around 2 o'clock, and then I shape my bread around 8 o'clock the next morning, and I have baked bread by 10 or 11. All you need is flour, salt, yeast, and water. I use a scale. I think it's more accurate, and you have a more consistent loaf every time. You can use measuring cups. I'll give you the measurements at the end. So it's 400 grams of bread flour. Use King Arthur flour if you can, or an unbleached, unmessed with flour. And then it's a 1/4 teaspoon of yeast. The reason you use so little yeast is the less yeast and the more time you give your bread, the better it will taste. And also, you give natural yeast, the ones that make sourdough, a chance to grow. Teaspoon and a 1/4 of salt. What the salt does is it inhibits the yeast growth a little. What happens is the yeast feeds on the sugar in the flour, and it creates carbon dioxide. And then there's gluten in flour. You've heard a lot about that lately. And the gluten kind of expands. It's very elastic, and the carbon dioxide creates bubbles, and then the gluten expands around it, and that's how you get the holes in the loaf and the bread to rise. Now I'm going to add 300 grams of water. And then I'm going to go grab a fork. All you do is mix it. You gotta remember, did I put everything in? Yeah, I did. You ever do that? You get distracted? Can't remember where you were? Notice I am not kneading. I'm not doing anything complicated. I just poured everything in and I'm mixing it up. Then once it's mixed, all I'm going to do is put some cellophane on it and leave it for 12 to 18 hours. I'm going to put just a little bit of flour down on my surface, and I'm going to put a tiny bit of flour over the dough. So what I do is I've got some flour on my hands, and I'm just going to scrape the bowl, and I dump the dough out. So you kind of stretch it out and fold it over, and then see, it gets sticky, so if you have flour on your hands, that's good. And then you want to just push it towards yourself until you make a ball. It's called a boule. And the tighter you can make the ball, the more it'll hold its shape. That's it. So I bring over my pan, and I'll push the boule one more time, and I lift the boule onto the parchment paper. It doesn't have to be perfect. I mean, once you get a hang, do it enough times, it'll get round, but it doesn't matter. You can have a misshapen loaf of bread. It just looks like homemade. Now, you can either, I like to do this, I put a cake top on it to keep it sealed, because if I put cellophane over it, it tends to stick to the bread. But you can use a big piece of cellophane, something that is over it but not touching the dough. And now I'm going to leave this for an hour and a half. So I put my oven on to 500. It's got to be pretty hot. And then I put the pan, the cold pan, in the cold oven. You don't want it to crack, and it's got to be hot when you put the bread in it, so it starts cooking it. I have a cooking stone in my oven. You don't need one. And then we're going to wait for the bread to rise and the oven to heat up. I've left this for about an hour and a half. The beauty of this bread is you can play with the time until you get a consistency in the bread you like, and it's going to turn out to be bread pretty much, as long as you don't leave it too long. So what I tend to do is I slice it with a blade. This is like a razor blade, but if you're desperate, you can also use a knife, so I'm going to show you both. So you have to be really, it didn't even go through it. And you can make little slices. That's so some of the air can escape, and it's going to make a pattern in the bread. I get my mitts. I have lots of burn scars. Use mitts. And I grab my pot and carefully pull it out of the oven. Wasn't that good? The beauty of putting this on the parchment is that you can lift up the loaf of bread and move it without ruining its shape. Drop it in the pot, mitts back on, cover the pot, and slide it into the oven. The bread's already started baking in the hot pot. And you set the timer for 20 minutes. After I put the bread in the oven, I lower the heat to 450. You may have noticed this is a pretty wet dough. What happens is you put the dough into this closed pan, and that water comes out and makes steam. And if it's in an enclosed space, the steam keeps the crust from forming so that the bread can expand, so you get those beautiful holes in the middle. And then eventually the steam dissipates because it's limited. And then the crust begins to form, and you have that beautiful, crunchy, brown crust. So that's why we're doing this, and I'll see you in a little while. The timer's gone off, and the steam's done all its work. So I'm gonna pull the pot out a little. You can take it completely out. And I take the lid off, and you can see it's formed a crust, but now it's gotta go brown. Push it back in the oven, and another 20 minutes. Last part and best part. I'm going to take the bread out of the oven. Okay, if you listen really closely, you can hear the bread talking. It's kind of like Rice Krispies, snap, crackle, and pop. What happens is the bread is still baking, even though it's out of the oven. Use your mitts to take it out. Whoa. And leave it to cool. So here you have it, a beautiful loaf of bread. You can peel the paper off when it cools. Just don't cut it until it's cool. There's still carbon dioxide off-gassing, and the moisture is redistributing in there, and you'll change it if you eat it. Also, you can get sick if you eat hot bread from the carbon dioxide. Once it is completely cool, you can freeze this and then just put it in a 300-degree oven for, I don't know, a half hour to thaw it again. So it's good for doing ahead of time for parties. I'm Elisa, and this is the InsecureEpicure. There was one last thing I wanted to tell you. I can't think of it.